Welcome everyone to this session of Infotouch University Online, where we go in depth into various features of our point of sale programs, Store Manager, and Storekeeper POS. Today's session is going to pick up off of where we left off a few weeks ago when we covered Inventory Reports Part 1. The inventory module has about 45 or 6 reports with many variations on all of them. And therefore couldn't fit it all into one session. We're going to recover the reports that we did not cover in the first session today and finish up this topic. I mentioned we are going to be covering for both our point of sale products. There is no difference between them as regards inventory reports. So let's get started. And I'm here in the inventory module. I'm running a demo gift store vertical, and as we saw in our first session, you can go ahead and run the reports off of the reports menu here right at the top, or go into the report inventory section with the green button below. The nice advantage of the menu up here is that you can see these reports categorized, and last time we covered the basic reports, the analysis reports, and our special features reports. So this time we're going to go through the rest of them, and some very important reports here, including the audit trail reports, labels, including barcode labels, vendors, and replenishment reports, which are principally concerning purchase orders. So let's get started, and we're going to first go into the received audit report. Whenever inventory is received into our POS, we keep track of it, and we keep track of it forever and allow you to report on it forever. So inventory being the heart of retail, we want to make sure you know exactly what you've received and what's in stock. So here is our received audit report. And actually, before I go into this, let's go ahead and do a receiving first, and that way we can go ahead and see the results. So I'm going to go into my Actions menu. Don't have to leave the Reports menu, although I could. And I can go straight into my Adjust Inventory. Receiving here, and the Received Audit Trail, by the way, covers receiving via Adjust Inventory function using either a handheld or directly. It also covers receiving via purchase order. There's no difference in terms of the audit trail, although we will note the purchase order number in the audit trail as well as on direct receiving if there was a vendor link to it. So I'm going to go into receive. In this case, I do have the handheld option on, but I'm not going to use it for right now. So let's go ahead and find an item. So we'll go ahead into our souvenirs department, and earlier I had created a new item called Bayou Country Pen. This gift store is supposed to be located in New Orleans. And you'll notice we have none on hand, and we'll select that, and the system will default to the current cost retail price and the preferred vendor. That's the first vendor if you have more than one. And we'll just keep those and say I'm going to receive 10 of these into stock. Quantity on hand is now 10. Great, let's go back to our reports now, and we can scroll down to the section with our audit trails, as well as, again, do it here from the menu. It doesn't really matter which way you get into it. And so we have, as in other inventory reports covered last week, a variety of ways to select items to report on. By default, we'll be sitting at the item number prompt. And with a from and to of blank, we are reporting on everything. So let's leave that. Notice that we can also report on specific departments with breakdowns by index for each of the departments that are selected, by department group, range of departments, range of UPCs. But again, as I said, we'll just report on all inventory for now. Let's go into our Options tab on the Audit Trail report. And like most all inventory reports, you do have a filter, vendor filter option, and a location filter. We won't worry about those for now. But what's most important here is the date range we select. And it defaults to year to date. I'll switch that to just reporting on today. All these reports can be previewed on the screen, sent to a printer, or exported to a disk file, typically comma delimited, for use with other applications like Excel. So, as I mentioned, we just received 10 Bayou Country pens. We did it at 12:06, which is right. We get the item number and description, the quantity received, the cost of goods sold, and we multiply those two to get the value of what's been put into stock. And then finally, there's this number field. It can be in two formats. So in this case, you'll notice a parentheses V after the number 1 that indicates that we did a direct receiving from vendor number 1. If we did receive this from a purchase order, we'd actually have the PO number with no V on there. So that's the received inventory audit trail report, and a very important report for being able to go back and check on what's happened with your inventory. The next audit trail report has to do with physical inventories, and those always do occur through the adjust menu, and we're going to do one of those right now. There are also two ways within adjust that a physical can happen. If you've got the handheld option, it's extremely much more convenient to use handhelds, go around your store, scan things multiple times with potentially multiple handhelds, and use that to do a physical a lot more quickly than doing it item by item. However, we're just going to do an example here, not worry about it too much. So let's go ahead and take, I'll pick out a random item 50, which happens to be a magazine. We currently have 54 on hand. And let's say I count this up in the store in my physical process, and I only count up 53. So we have, watch the quantity on hand go down. We've just done a item physical for that item. And now let's take a look at the audit for it. You'll notice, by the way, that the date range that we entered earlier is retained. You do have an option here to not report on items where what you counted matched what we thought you should have. We won't worry about that for now, but it is there. If you've got 3,000 items and only 12 of them are off, it's nice to be able to just see the ones that are off instead of the 2,900 plus that were correct. But here's our item number 50. That's a Fortune magazine in this case. We counted it up at 12:09. We counted 53, expected 54, so we had one less than we should have. We'll take a look at the average cost on that and multiply it by the difference, and that represents the value of the inventory, either negative or positive, compared to what we expected. In this case, we lost one of those, so we missed out on 96 cents worth of our inventory value just went out the window. But at least we can account for it, and we can do things like send that information over to the general ledger. When you do a physical inventory using the handheld, you're typically going to update either all of the store's inventory or all of the inventory for a particular department or all the inventory for a particular location. And instead of just having one item counted, you will typically have many, many, and all those will show up automatically on the report, the audit trail report here, once you complete your physical inventory. I'm just going to mention this next audit trail report. It's the transfers report. And in stores with multiple locations, you may want to transfer inventory from one to another. There are functions for transferring inventory in or out in both the replenishment module and the register module. The replenishment one is newer and more full function, but either one will produce a change to your inventory. Anytime you change inventory with our software, we want to note it, capture it, and allow you to report on it. On the other hand, single stores really don't have much use for this function, so we'll just skip by it, but it's just a basic listing of what was transferred again over a date range. Another way we can affect the quantity on hand for items is by using an inventory quantity adjustment. And that again is in our adjust menu. There's no handheld option for quantity adjustment. This is kind of a one-off thing typically. So let's say I got a souvenir and it was broken. And so I need to get it out of my inventory, but I didn't sell it and I want to capture it. So let's find a souvenir here. Let's take a coffee cup. We have 10 on hand right now, and we'll select that item. So tell us how much you want to adjust it by. If you want to reduce it, you do need to put in a negative number, but you can also increase it. Maybe you found something laying in a back storeroom that you had accidentally set aside, and now you want to get it into your inventory. So you would put in a positive, but let's say I broke one of these guys. You always have the option when doing an adjustment to do a free-form reason. By the way, we will demand that you put in some reason. Why are you adjusting this? And it could be something like broken. Spell that correctly. Or you can use one of the preset reasons. So these are set up, by the way, in setup-inventory-adjustment reason codes. And let's say it's damaged. We'll go ahead and use one of our standard ones here since we see one that's quite relevant. So we now have one less of this coffee cup in stock. And we also have something to report on with our adjustment reason codes. So, and similar to what we saw with receiving, we're going to give you the value of what was either added or removed from stock. Removed would be negative. And we also, on an item level basis, will report on why that inventory was removed or added. Okay, so we're moving right along through our audit trail reports. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm talking, as you saw in the transfer report, I'll talk through some of the lesser used ones, but we'll at least mention them. So markdown audit is one of those. Markdowns occur in the system when you do a transform inventory on the price of an item and you reduce it and you tell us while you're reducing it that you want to apply that to markdowns. So for example, in the clothing business, let's say you brought in a line of jeans and from a vendor and those jeans are just not selling. You need to get the price down when you, in order to get them out the door. But we also want to record that price change as a markdown so that the next time the vendor comes in, we can beat them up with a markdown audit trail report that says, hey, I had to mark these jeans way down. You need to do something for me now. Also on the audit trail side is a recording of whenever you create a new item. So let's take a look at that. It's very straightforward. Just tell me the days you want to report on. And that Bayou Country pen that I mentioned earlier that we received into stock, I created it this morning, and there it is. And this is a very basic report, just showing you the date, item number, description, and UPC of items that were created over the date range you select, and for the items you select. Lastly, let's go into in terms of the audit reports. The price change audit report will show you anytime you change the retail price or the sale price of items, again, over a date range. So anytime you change that retail price, for example, here's our Bayou Country pen. Well, let's go ahead and make this a little more, interactive so you can see it. We'll go into, let's say that Fortune magazine we talked about earlier, and say the price is now up to $250. Run that same report, and there's the Fortune magazine. So what we don't record, by the way, is the original price. What we will tell you is what the new price is at the time you made the change and the quantity on hand at the time you made the change. A variation of this in the Options tab allows you to report on sale price changes. And after I created that Bayou Country pin, I decided to put it on sale immediately. And you can see that there it's now selling at $1.75. I've got 10 on hand, and the end date for the sale is also indicated when you do this. Let's take a quick look at that item. And you'll notice the item is on sale. So anytime you make a change to the retail or to the sale price, we're going to record that for you. And that's the last of our audit trail reports. The next section concerns label reports, of which by far the most interesting and most used are the received price labels and price labels reports, which do print optionally barcodes. We'll get to those in just a second, but let's quickly go over location and notes labels. So location and notes labels do not print barcodes. Only the received price labels and price labels do. So why would I want it? Well, the original purpose of it was for a shelf tag, and then people wanted to use the inventory notes feature, which allows you to put in some other information about an item. Usual case and why we originally added this was for the garden center market, where you can put the growing instructions for an item right into the inventory description and then have it print on the receipt, on barcode labels, and on location labels and notes labels. So we'll select all of our items. Now, let's do a little change here. Let's go and select our newspaper items here. So this gift store sells newspapers, and we're going to print location labels. And you have an option here of location labels and whether to include the price. And what are we going to print? And the number field here has several options. These are mostly, well, let me skip this for now. This is very important and relevant for barcode labels for items, probably not so much for location and notes labels, although it does not hurt to have it. These can only go to an Avery or compatible label, and we have a drop-down list with lots of different labels. 2 by 5. We can select the starting row and column, and optionally print the text in compressed print, which, depending on the size of your labels, may help you fit more of the description right on the label. So here is our newspaper items, and we've got the UPC here of an Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and it costs $1 because I told it to include the price. The notes label option will go ahead and include extra information if the item has notes. Okay. And I'll just briefly mention that we can also print serialized price labels, again, to Avery only. The real interesting reports here are the price labels and the received price labels, and this is used for printing barcode labels for items, as well as shelf tags where you want the barcode on it, which is very common, and also to print labels for items that have been received into stock automatically. Let's start out with the price labels report. We'll take a look at our options first, and you'll notice there's quite a few more. So I mentioned this number field option here, and let's take a look at what the choices are. Every item in Infotouch has an item number, and we can scan a barcode of that item number and find it. The barcode that we're going to print typically here, at least within the system, is going to be a code 39 barcode, which supports the printing of alphanumeric characters, which UPCs don't allow. So items also may have an optional UPC field. So what the first choice is saying is, hey, look, if the UPC field is there, print it. Otherwise, well, we know you've got an item number, so print that. For legacy purposes, we had some people who actually always wanted to print the item number on these labels, and we do have that option, but I don't think it's widely used. The newest one we added is, I think, really kind of a nice one. You know, if an item has a UPC code, it probably is coming with that UPC barcode right on the packaging. So we don't really need to print a label for it. We're just going to skip if UPC not blank. In other words, if the item has a UPC, we're going to skip it. If the item does not have a UPC, we'll print it, and of course we'll use the item number at that point on the barcode. Some other options here, by the way, include our price change filter. So I can print barcodes for items whose prices have changed on a certain date. Let's say I made a bunch of changes this morning, and I need to print out new labels for those items because I include the price on the item, on the label, excuse me. So that allows me to do that. We also have a handheld filter option, which if you do have the handheld inventory option will allow you to take a handheld, go out into the store, scan whatever items you want, key in quantities, and come back to the system and print barcode labels for those items you've entered into the handheld. As we look up here now, we've got a couple of very interesting points. So do we want to print a label for each unit? Okay, so if I've got 0 of an item, I won't print any. If I've got 10 of an item, I'll print 10. And that's great if I'm starting from scratch. If I wanted to print a shelf tag with a barcode on it, for example, though, I don't really want 10 for the one item and 0 for the other. I want 1 for everything. So the number of labels to print will allow you to put in any number, but it will default to 1, and probably what's most often used. You also have ability to print labels for items with multiple units of measure. So if I've got, let's say, beer by the case, 6-pack and singles, I can print barcodes for my stocking unit, presumably the case, or for my default selling unit, maybe the 6-pack, or maybe I just want everything. So I'll go ahead and print barcodes for everything out of there. So just realize that is an option for you for items with multiple units. And another checkbox here to use the sale price for an item if it's on sale. I'm going to skip over the extra price level. It's not really used here very much. You can print the short description on a label for the item. So, with our 40-character descriptions, those are sometimes hard to fit on labels. You can use the short description to make that easy to fit on a label. There is, by the way, a new setup option that was added fairly recently that strips the department name when you're not using the short description. When you're using the full description, you can tell us in setup, yeah, that's nice, but just don't print the department name because it's taking up a lot of room and we don't really need it. We'll leave that alone for now. And we have a bunch of price formats, and I'll get back to this in a second. So let's use the standard one to begin with and go finally onto our Labels tab. And this is where, if you've told us in setup that you've got a barcode printer, you will use, you'll see this Use Barcode Printer option. And that's really all you need at that point. If you don't have a barcode printer, or if you don't want to use it, you can switch to using a report printer, that is to say Avery Labels. Barcode printers, by the way, by far the most popular choice is the Zebra. It used to be the LP2824. That has been supplanted recently by the 2824 Plus, which is a good thing because the 2824 Plus supports both what are called the ZPL and EPL programming languages. We use the EPL one. On the older version of the Zebra, you had to order the specific model that supported EPL. With the 2824 Plus, you don't have to worry about it because it will auto-detect what we're sending to the printer, or what language we're sending to the printer, and therefore it'll work regardless. Do bear in mind that you really want to get this in a serial version. So there you go. But for now, we're going to use the report printer so I could show you the labels on the screen. If you want to print a barcode, and this is using our supplied code 39 font onto the screen, check that with barcode labels. And then again, you've got the choices for Avery Labels to print on, and an option to use compress print. So let's finish this up. And here's a barcode for all of the newspaper items we had selected. And items that have a UPC code, like this Atlanta Journal, we'll print the UPC. That's what we had selected. Otherwise, we'll use a barcode of the item number. We'll then show the description of the item and the price. And we had selected the option of one for each item, so you'll notice there is just one of those. So very, very useful here. Let's take a look at some of the other options. In particular, under the price format, one we did custom for one of our resellers that has proved to be quite popular is the large price format, where instead of that price being hard to read on the item, it's in a very big print, but it does come at a bit of an expense in that we have less room for other things. And if you look at this and go, whoa, what's that? Okay, so we have a restructured version of the label. You notice the large print. Here is the description. Here is the barcode and the item number, human readable. And you'll also notice that there's some of the item notes there as well. That was part of the original design that they had requested with this label. So how do I get this to work right? We go back and run it again, and one of the things we didn't go over is that you have a selection of a wide variety of styles and sizes with the barcode we're going to print. So if you see it running over, switch to maybe a narrower style in a smaller font. And now it fits on the label. And you got a nice big price. The received price labels report is basically the same as the price labels report, except instead of you selecting items and that's it, we have one other most important criteria, which is to generate labels for items received over a date and time range that you specify. Everything else is the same. By the way, one option that we have here that we didn't have in the other is you can actually print labels for a specific PO. So if I had a PO number, 123 or whatever that I just received into stock, rather than worrying about the date and time, just put in the PO number and we'll automatically print out labels for those items received. We'll leave it though for today. And here, let's take one last look at the number of labels to print versus print a label for each unit. In this case, print a label for each unit means print a label for each unit that was received during that date and time. So in this case, this is much more common. Although if you wanted to print a new shelf tag, for example, for those items received into stock over the date range, you can do that as well. But let's go ahead and switch to printing a label for each unit. And I'll go ahead and, let's go ahead also and switch back. The large price format label only works with one Avery label format, and it won't let you select anything else. So let's go ahead and go back to our standard price label for a second, and then we'll cover the final two formats that I had not talked about previously. I'll switch to that 2x5. Maybe we'll put the compressed print in there. And remember, we received a bunch of Bayou Country pens earlier. That's what we're seeing showing up here. You may have multiple pages of this, by the way. In this case, there's only one, but it might say 1 of 2 or 1 of 200. We don't care. Let's finish up our price labels and labels in general by taking a look at the final two options under price format. We had a lot of folks saying, when I print a barcode label and I slap it on an item, if it's got the price on it and the price changes, I got to print another label. Why do I want that? I don't. I just want to go ahead and print the labels without a price on it at all, and then I don't have to worry about changing it as my price changes. So price is now gone. One thing that happens, and this is both for received price labels and price labels, is that if you do have a price format of none, then Well, in general, actually, if you have a price format of anything except this last one, if an item has a price of 0, we're not going to print a label for it at all. There's not too much point of putting a price of 0.00 on a label that the customer sees. They're going to come up and say, I want this for free. And of course, that 0 price is an indication for us that at the point of sale to key in the price. But we do have some folks that figure that if they're not going to see the 0 price on the label, they would actually like to print a barcode for it, so they could scan at the register and then key in the price, and none include 0 does that. Okay, so that covers our label reports, and our next section is for vendors. And excuse me for going rather quickly here, but we still have quite a few topics to cover, and I don't want to keep this going on for too long, so we'll start skipping over some more of the reports. Honestly, these are typically less interesting reports, than, at least some of them are, than what we've covered so far. Sources is Infotouch speak for the link between your items and your vendors. Let's take a look at that real quick. So here's a newspaper I sell. If I look at the vendors tab, these two lines are both referred to in our software as sources. So this item is sourced by 2 vendors, ABC Supply Corp and 123 Distributors. And the sources report will show you for the selected items, and optionally with some filters, who's supplying what to you. So we were just looking at item number 5, Washington Post Daily, and there's the 2 suppliers. We include the item number and the vendor item number, as well as the UPC code, the cost, and then if it has discounting options. For example, you could tell the software that if you buy so much of an item, you're going to get either a percentage or dollar discount. If that's set in the record automatically, it'll show up there. We also have a report that shows us what items are on order from our vendors, obviously from placing a purchase order. So currently we have 567 USA Today newspapers on order, and it also gives you a list of the vendors that supply that item. The vendor contact list, not terribly interesting. It just goes ahead and shows you the vendor name, number, key contact, a second contact, and their phone number. The vendor master list, like most of our master list reports, is an attempt to basically cram as many fields in the record that we have onto a report so you can have a hard copy if you like it. Mailing labels allow you to print the mailing labels for your vendors if you go ahead and print up your POs and send them in, or if you want to use it for maybe sending in a check to your vendor or what have you, we can print mailing labels for you. Trust me, you're not interested in vendor GL numbers. It really isn't used. It's still there for no good reason except for the fact that we have GL numbers in the vendor record, but we're not really using it, so just ignore that one. Vendor analysis, on the other hand, is a much more interesting report. Let's select all of our items. And here we're able to take a look at activity by vendor, sorted by either description or vendor. And when I say look at activity, let's go ahead and select a date range. I'm going to set this one back a while to include more information. And here we get a list over the date range of those items sold by a particular vendor. In this case, we start off with items that are not linked to a vendor at all, but then you'll notice here's the items from ABC Supply Corp, and here's items from 123 Distributors, and it goes on to show you how many units you sold and how many you've got on hand. So a good way of getting a feel for what's selling and what's not by vendor. And now on to our purchase order and replenishment reports in general, most of which are related to purchase orders. PO listing is kind of the equivalent of the electronic journal, if you would, for purchase orders. So over a date range that you select, or over an order number range, or a vendor number range, you can report on your purchase orders. And by the way, you can fill in the fields that are not the ordered by to use them as filters. So in this case, for example, I would be reporting on my POs sorted by vendor, but only between this date range, and number range and vendor number range. You can have all three at the same time. We go into our options tab. We have the option of looking at a line item detail by default, or just a summary report on the purchase order. We're normally going to include our item number on this listing, but we could say to use the vendor item number instead, and optionally also add a line for the UPC and price of the item. What normally is going to show is the cost, not the price. And we can select which statuses we want to report on. So purchase orders have status of open and back ordered, received and returned. Let's switch this one back to, let's say, this beginning of this month, and see what we got. And so here's a big, long purchase order. Actually, it was one I did manually a little while ago to test a new feature that we have. We do have a limit on the number of lines in a purchase order. It varies based on your item number length and some other things, but it is typically maybe under 100. And we have customers that were looking for more lines in both purchase orders and in sales. And we are taking advantage now of newer versions of our database that support larger records, actually 4 times larger records. So we can now do basically about 4 times the number of lines in a PO or an invoice if you purchase, and you do have to purchase it. We don't supply the newer versions yet, but if you want to purchase the newer versions of Pervasive, we can take advantage of that function to give you things like 500 line sales, which we just couldn't do before. So here's a long purchase order that I was using to test the maximum number of line items. And then here's one I added earlier today. So we get descriptions of the items, the cost, discount, amount, and on a summary basis, the date and time place, the PO number, the vendor number. Who's that one there? Well, that's the reference number. If it is there, reference number gives you a way to assign your own PO essentially to our purchase order. And then we get some totals, the vendor name, when it's expected to arrive, which is based on when you place it and the average ship time from that vendor, which you can also override as you're making a purchase order, the status of it, and when it was last updated, and some totals. So, a listing basically of what's going on in all the purchase orders based on the criteria you select. And some of the other things to be thinking about here, if I wanted to report on POs that have already been received in this date range, I wouldn't see it unless I check these or if they were returned to the vendor. Now we saw the expected arrival date on that purchase order listing, and we can leverage that in the PO expected shipment reports. So we know we have in the purchase order a date when we expect it to come, and I might want to just do a quick report to say, I don't care about the vendors or the items, show me based on a date range what I'm expecting to come in. So the purchase order I did this morning is supposed to come in next month. It goes on the 3rd. I'll make it out to the 4th. It doesn't going to hurt. And we'll see now, yep, there's that PO I did this morning with some books and some candy, and it's expected to arrive on June 3rd, so it's included in this report. If I went and ran that report and switched this back to today, we wouldn't see it anymore. And in fact, we don't expect to receive anything today. So a good way to be able to check on what's supposed to be coming in when. The PO checkpoints report is an interesting report if you use the checkpoints feature. Checkpoints are user-definable flags that you can attach to a purchase order to walk it through the process of maybe ordering, receiving, checking the quality, putting into stock, and anything else you can think of. If you use that feature, now honestly I don't think most people do, then you can basically get a PO listing report that includes these user-definable flags, and by the way, you can define the name of it, so it doesn't have to say user-definable 1, 2, 3. And the first two received and returned are set by the system. So we'll filter out the purchase orders based on the checkpoints you specify, including, by the way, ignore, meaning, I don't care if it's on or off. So if you use that, this is an interesting report. But as I said, most people don't, and I won't spend too much time on it. As you receive items into stock or receive purchase orders into stock, we do generate an accounts payable log file, which we intend to use in a future release for updating accounts payable in our GL interfaces like QuickBooks and Peachtree. We don't do that today, but it is on our list. And the first step in order to be able to generate the information to the GL that we need is to actually capture it. And so if you run the AP log, you will actually see indication of what came into stock over a date range you specify. And we haven't received much lately, but we did get in an order from ABC Supply Corporation for a total of $12. So this could be sent over to the GL, and then maybe we would generate a check from our accounts payable side. One of the most interesting reports in the PO section is the auto generation report. This will preview what the PO auto generation function will actually generate for you if you use it. That's in the replenishment module. So we have a function in the replenishment module to take a look at what you've got and generate purchase orders for you based on a number of criteria. But you might want to check it out before you do it, although you could go back and modify those generated purchase orders if necessary. But in the meantime, let's take a look at what we think we're going to generate first and maybe fix it up in advance. And you basically have the same kind of criteria here as you have in the PO auto generation side. The only difference is in the replenishment PO auto generation function itself, you can specify all of inventory or a specific department. This report will show you all of inventory, no choice. So as we can get up to 10 different vendors for a specific item, if an item has more than one vendor, we need to figure out which vendor to use. Preferred vendor means the first one on the list, but maybe we're looking to save some money and we want to use the lowest cost, or maybe we're in a hurry and we don't care what it costs, so who's the one that ships it to me the fastest? Alternatively, I could say, you know what, I don't care, just I want to tell you what vendor I want to use. I'm going to use ABC Supply. And you can either use the drop-down list here of your vendor numbers or this binoculars to look them up by description, which is what I just did. But let's go back to preferred vendor for a second. We're going to create a report here. You have an option to sort that report by item number or description. And then there are two ways that we have in our software to figure out what we're going to generate for you. Typically, min-max. So I have set up a minimum and maximum quantity in my inventory record. When the quantity on hand plus the quantity on order, because we don't want to reorder it again once it's been ordered, goes below that minimum value, then we will reorder up to the maximum. And that's what most folks use, but there is a sales history option as well. This is very much related to the merchandise planning report we saw in the last session. So we pick out a date range. We figure out what items sold over that date range, factor in a growth target, which could be positive or negative. Let's say I'm expecting 5% more, or if I put in a minus 5% sales. We'll count up how many of each of these items sold. We'll factor in the growth rate, and then we'll compare that to the quantity on hand. And if it's below it, then we're going to try and order enough to meet that growth rate target. Min-max is much more common. So let's just go ahead and finish this up, and we'll see that ABC Supply Corp is actually the only vendor right now that is got items that need to be ordered, and include some newspapers, books, apparel, etc. Here's the description, the item number, and the quantity we're going to order. As long as this report only has one vendor number on it, we are likely to only generate one purchase order, although if there's more than the maximum number of lines, we'll automatically generate multiple purchase orders. And if there's more than one vendor, of course, we cannot create a purchase order for more than one vendor, so we'll create one for each of them. So this gives you a chance to check things out, maybe make some changes to your minimum and maximums for some of those items, and get it right before you actually generate the purchase orders. The PO Open to Buy report is going to take information from the Open to Buy section in Setup Inventory, where by department you tell us over a date range, which we haven't modified in a while, the dollar or unit amount that you're going to expect to buy in this period. And we'll take a look at the amounts you've already ordered and give you a percentage of what you've ordered against your budget. And the last report here is the transfers report, and that mirrors the transfers that we talked about earlier with the transfer audit trail. These can come from either the register or the replenishment module, and again, usually only used for multiple stores. So we'll skip that one today, and that will conclude our coverage of the remaining inventory reports. So we've done them all now. Yeah, thank you very much.